Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Maria Kliavkov, and I'm going to be talking to you today about buried and carried grief and about fear and what fear does to us when we are in the grief process. So there are really two different kinds of fear that shows up when we're in the grief process. There is the fear that is an emotion that is part of our grief process. It may show up as anxiety, it may show up as a panic attack, it may just show up as a queasiness. You know, C.S. Lewis, in his brilliant book, A Grief Observed, said, I never knew that grief felt so much like fear. Fear is very much a part of the grief process, in part because we just can't even process all of the information that's coming to us. We're overwhelmed by everything that's happening and everything that we're being asked to deal with and all of the emotions that are coming up. And we're fearful that we're not going to be able to make it through it. So that's the anxiety of the fear that's the anxiety of the fear. That's the anxiety that's coming up in us that's very real around how are we going to live our lives without this person in their physical presence. You know, when my mother died, that was a very real fear. I loved talking with her. I spoke to her on the phone every night. What was my life going to be like without that touchstone, without being able to call her every single night? And there would be times when I'd come home from work and I'd forget and I'd be heading to the phone, and then suddenly I'd remember and I'd be devastated. And what came over me was not sadness as much as it was kind of this mild panic of I'm alone in the world. So that kind of fear is part of your grief journey, and learning how to be present to that fear and be with that fear, that's really important. And it's a big part of learning how to move through the grief process with ease and grace. The other kind of fear that comes up is the fear that causes us to bury and carry our grief. It's when, we have this tidal wave of emotion, and truly grief comes in waves, right? It comes in little waves, and then the waves grow and they grow. And eventually, sometimes they look like just walls of water it's going to take us out. And so we fear going into the emotion that's coming up, or we fear going into whatever the memory is, because we think it's going to take us out. And we think we'll never be rid of it. We'll never be rid of the guilt that we're carrying or the shame that we're carrying. And so instead of dealing with it and being present to it, we decide to bury and carry it. That's actually the fear of grief. It's the fear of the grief process. And if you find yourself fearing your grief process and burying and carrying it and pretending it's not there, let me tell you, that's suffering with it. There's a wonderful saying that says in life, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And when it comes to grief, that is absolutely true. When we are grieving, the truth is that pain is inevitable. We love this person. It's really hard to be in a world where they're not physically present. So pain is inevitable in that, but suffering is optional. And if you're not sure how to be in the grief process in a way that is with ease and grace for yourself, and you're not sure how to honor the pain and move through it, and instead what you're choosing to do is bury it or carry it or avoid it in some way, and next week I'll talk a lot about grief avoidance and what that might be looking like for you, then I encourage you to please private message me, connect with me. Let's find a way to do a discovery call and see if working together might be a way for you to discover and learn how to be in your grief process with ease and grace, because that really is the key. When we have confidence that we can be present with our pain and that we'll be able to move through it, then the grief process becomes a really exquisite dance. And we get to reclaim our memories, and we get to reclaim the joy of our life with that person. You see, when we bury and carry our grief, then we actually block ourselves off from the joy that was part of our relationship. And we block ourselves off from the possibility of discovering where that relationship is now, because we're not willing to be present in our grief journey that will get us there. I promise you, your grief journey will get you to the other side, and only you know your way through that. You have to be willing to do that journey, though. And if you find yourself pushing against it and not being willing to do the journey, then please contact me and let's connect and let's see if there's a way that we can work together. I look forward to seeing you again in the next Facebook. I will once again post the schedule. And in the meantime, I just wish you peace and gentleness on your grief journey. Namaste.